Hey, this is Jared, and in this video I'm going to be talking about media queries and how to use them effectively. So you may be aware that since CSS2 we've been able to say that a style sheet should only apply to a certain media type. For example, we could have a document use a large font on a screen and then use a smaller font for print. And screen and print are media types. Media queries allow us to go a bit beyond this and be more specific about when we want our styles to apply. So a media query consists of a media type and then 0 or more expressions that check for the conditions of a particular media feature. Among the media features that we can query are width, height and colour, and we also have minimums and maximums within those width and heights. So the media query itself is an expression that's either going to evaluate to true or false. And if it evaluates to true, the style that's associated with it is going to be applied, and if it evaluates to false, it's not going to be applied. So how do we write a media query? Well, it's just like I've written here. We start with the media type that we want to target, whether that be a computer screen, or a print preview, or a handheld device, or even all the media types. And then we separate from the media type by using the word and then we use these media features. We bracket them separately and we use one of these media features here. So this is where we really get a bit more specific. So for example, we could specify a set of widths where our style should apply. So let's jump straight into an example. So here I have a fairly standard desktop layout. The page has two 50% wide columns, and you can see at the moment it's quite nice to read because we have a good amount of words per line. We have about 10 words per line here. But then when we scale it down, you can see that it starts to get a little bit uncomfortable. So when it gets to this sort of point and we have less than 5 words per line, it's just not as comfortable to read. So wouldn't it be great if we could have our columns spread out and fill 100% of the width when we get to a certain point? And we can. So the first step is to choose a breakpoint. A breakpoint is the point where you want the new style to kick in. So the way I'm going to do this is when you're choosing breakpoints, try not to target specific devices. It can be tempting to sort of look at the resolution of certain devices and try to base your breakpoints around that. But the aim with responsive design is to provide the optimal experience at any size. So choose breakpoints based on your design and just resize the window until it feels uncomfortable. If you're in Chrome, if you open up the DevTools and then background them and resize your window, you'll get this sort of scope up at the top right to see what size your window is. So it looks to me like this is getting a little bit uncomfortable, just around 600 pixels. So I'm going to write a media query with the breakpoint of 600 pixels. So this is the page that you were just looking at, and you can see we've linked in this style sheet style.css, so I'll open that up. And I'm going to go down to the bottom here because we're going to be affecting the width of the column class, so we need it to be after the initial 50% width that we've written beforehand. So the way we write media queries within a style sheet is we say @media and then we write our media query. So I'm going to target all media types, then we use that word and to separate from the media features, and then we're going to write our media feature, so we put it in brackets. And we want to say max width of 600 and then open up some curly braces. So now we can just write normal CSS within this block here, but it's only going to apply when the viewport has a width of 600 pixels or smaller. So as I say, it's just normal CSS, so we're going to say in here dot column, give it a width of 100%. Notice here I've targeted all media types and then I've had to use that AND keyword. However, if we totally take that out and we don't specify a media type, the all media type is actually implied, so we don't need to have that in there. So now let's look at our site. Now you can see if I resize and I go past 600 pixels, the column spreads out to 100% width and it's easier to read for our users. So currently this conditional style is embedded within our style sheet, and this is not the only way we can do it, so I'm going to comment this out here because we can also put it inside a link tag. You may have seen this before, but if I make a link tag here, I can add a media attribute to it. So inside this media attribute is just like what we put after the @media. So that's where we put our media query. So I'm going to put my max width 600 pixels in there, and then I'm going to link it to another file. So I'm going to call this file small.css, and I believe I've already created this. So in here is just what we had within the block inside our CSS. So now if we look at that and save both files, you should see it has the exact same effect. So there's two ways of doing this. This is the separate way, and this here is the embedded way. And there are advantages and disadvantages to both. So usually embedded is best because it avoids having to download the extra file. Even though it's a very small file, it's an extra HTTP request, and that can slow down page load times, and that's really not something that you want to be doing. Also, having this embedded means you can keep all the styles for the column in the same place, and that's quite handy sometimes. However, there may be times when it is more organised to put it in a separate file. For example, if you had like a print style sheet that you wanted to have completely separate from your main style sheet, and it didn't have a whole lot in common with your main style sheet, you could put that separately and it wouldn't make a whole lot of difference. So that's one of many decisions you'll have to consider when working with media queries. So anyway, most queries that you're going to create will probably involve width in some way. In sites that scroll vertically, the width is what's going to cause the layout to change the most. Usually you'll want to use a range rather than a specific width, like we've done here. So here we've just set an upper bound of 600 pixels, and then everything below that, the style within this block is going to apply. But what if we wanted to set a lower bound? So let's say we wanted to make the header orange between 400 and 800 pixels. So we create our @media, and then we could use our media features. So we say min width, this is how we set our lower bound. I'm going to say 400 pixels, sorry. And then we say and max width 800 pixels. So you can see it's a fairly intuitive syntax and it's really quite nice. So now we can go in here. I'm using the HTML5 header element, so there's no dot or anything there. So I'm going to say background colour orange, and again we're coming after the initial rule that sets the colour for the header, because otherwise, because otherwise it would not apply. So now if we save that and look over here, you can see that between 800 and 400 pixels we're getting that style applied. So that's how you set a range and tie multiple query conditions together. Do note that each media feature is bracketed separately. So there are lots of other media features we can query, but I'm only going to talk about width today as that's the most important one. If you're interested in looking at the others, you can go over to the Mozilla Developer Network page for media queries and look at all of these media features. But trust me when I say that the most important one for everyone is going to be width, min width and max width. So now we've looked at media features, let's have a look at these media types. So if we go over to the W3C page for media types, there's a really good explanation for each of the media types. So we can see that all, as I said earlier, is suitable for all devices. The print is intended for page material and for documents viewed on screen in print preview mode. So it's very clear about when each media type is going to apply. So let's look at an example of this in action. So I have this web layout here. As you can see, it's a fairly standard web layout again. So we have our navigation at the top, the content in the middle, and some top quality advertising at the bottom. If I go to a print preview of this page, you can see that we still have our navigation visible and we still have our advertising visible. This is not really ideal for the user because when they're printing a page, what they're really looking to print is just the content. Bear in mind that they're going to have limited paper and limited ink, and you really don't want to be printing anything for them that they don't want you to print. So let's see how we can control that. So this is the page that you were just looking at, and again you can see that we've linked in this style sheet style.css, so we'll go over to there. And we're going to create a media query at the bottom here. And all we're going to do is target the media type print. We're not going to use any media features. And in here we're just going to hide the navigation and the add. So we're just going to do that by saying display none. And you know what, I'm also, just to stop people from sort of frustratedly trying to click on their piece of printed paper, I'm also going to say in here, I'm going to take the anchor tags and I'm going to give them a text decoration or a text decoration of none, and then give it a colour of inherit, so it takes the colour from the text around it. So now if we refresh that, you'll see there's no change visibly on the screen, but then when we go to a print preview, all we're left with is the content. So our navigation is gone, our advertisement is gone, and we've nicely hidden those links. So at the moment this is only applying to where the media type is print. But what if we wanted to apply it, say, to when the media type is anything but screen? So we've already looked at the AND operator. We saw that earlier when we were tying together two media features. So let's look at the NOT operator. So if I was to say in here, not screen, the NOT keyword here, or the NOT operator, negates the entire query. So where it would usually be true, it's going to be false, and where it's going to be usually false, it's going to be true. So now in every media type apart from screen, this is what's going to be displayed. So again, if we refresh the page here, you're not going to see a change, but when we go to the print preview, because it's not a screen media type, that's what we're going to see. We're going to see the style that we put in that block. So that's how we use the NOT keyword. Do note that when you're using the NOT operator, if you're using it with media features, say we were using it with max width, you can't leave out the media type. So before we could, and the media type of all would be specified, but here you do have to say it explicitly. So just bear that in mind. We can also use multiple media queries together. So let's say we wanted to apply this style here on everything that's not a screen, but also on screens with a width smaller than 400 pixels. So all we have to do is comma separate our media queries. So now in here we're going to say max width 400 pixels. I'm going to say screens where. So what this is doing here is we're looking for anything that isn't a screen and anything that is a screen and is less than or equal to 400 pixels in width. So this comma acts like a logical OR, so if either of these things are true, then the style is going to get applied. So let's have a look at that now. So now again you see no change until we go down to less than 400 pixels. And also when we're in print preview, that still applies. So that's all the basic syntax, but there are a lot of other style considerations when working with media queries. We've already looked at embedded versus external. You'll also have to consider how you'll build up your media queries. So often you'll have multiple different breakpoints, and there are different ways to layer them. First of all, it's a good idea to keep a base style outside of any media queries for unsupported browsers, namely Internet Explorer 8 and below. So if you look at anything that we were doing earlier, we've had quite a lot outside the media queries and very little inside actually. But after your base style, you can either overlap queries or put them sort of back to back and have the styles apply individually. So let's look at these two methods. So overlapping, you'll notice we have no upper bound on the queries, so they're going to run into each other. So you can see here I've commented in where we're going to be picking up things from the previous query. So you can see here, because there's no upper bound on the 300, everything that has a width of 600 or higher is also going to have a width of 300 or higher, so it's going to collect in everything from the 300 pixel or more query. Likewise, with the lack of upper bound on 600, we're going to get everything in 900 from both 600 and 300. So we're getting this sort of cumulative effect where these queries pick up everything before them. So now we can look at the individual and back-to-back method. So you'll see here that the styles don't run into each other at all. So what we have is this coming from 300 to 599, and then this one takes over from 600 to 899, and then this takes over from 900 onwards. So these are totally mutually exclusive, and they sort of start afresh each time, so they don't depend on each other at all. There are a couple of things to bear in mind about both of these methods. When you're overlapping, you will have to override styles from the previous queries. So you can see here that the first query, the min width 300 pixels, applies a border to all the divs. But what if after 600 pixels I don't want a border? Well, I'm going to have to override that and say border 0 pixels or border none. Whereas in the individual or back-to-back method, I wouldn't have to do that because these are not relying on each other at all. The other thing about overlapping, which is a slight niggle, is that the order matters. So if you were to put, say, this 900 pixel query up here, what we put in the 900 pixel query is now going before there, so it's going to go in here, which means that again we have this sort of overriding issue, because if we wanted to have a border radius of 10 pixels in here and we'd expect that to work, then we'd be wrong. In fact, I've put that the wrong way around. Because you can see that when the browser's reading this, it's going to apply a color of red, a border of 2 pixels, a border radius of 10, but then it's going to come back down, and if it's got a minimum width of 900, it's definitely going to have a minimum width of 600, so it's going to follow on, and it's going to see the border radius of 5 pixels and apply that. So what we put in there is going to not be applied. So that's something to be aware of as well. Hopefully that made sense to you. In the individual style, the order doesn't matter at all, so we can shuffle these about as much as we want and nothing's going to happen. When you're doing it individually, the downside is that you might end up rewriting quite a lot of stuff. So you can see that there is quite a bit more code here than there is up here. If you take out the comments that I've put in, then there's really not a whole lot of code there, whereas down here there's quite a bit because we're doing both the upper bounds and then we might end up repeating styles a few times. So we've repeated color red there. Also be careful if you're doing this sort of individual back-to-back style, be careful not to overlap at all. So I'm going to shuffle these back so that it makes a bit more sense, because I don't like that. So you might have noticed earlier I had to fix this because it said 600 pixels. So if that's 600 pixels, it's going to overlap 1 pixel with this. So for windows that are exactly 600 pixels wide, both of these are going to apply. That's not a huge problem in this case, but we are going to get a border where we don't want it here, because we're going to collect in this border here, which is something that we didn't expect to happen. So do be careful that they are completely mutually exclusive. As a general rule, unless you have like radically different styles for each breakpoint, overlapping tends to be easier. If you're using different background images, however, for different sizes, then you should apply them with this back-to-back style. This is because WebKit browsers download all background images even if they get overridden. So as an example of this, let's create a new file quickly. And say I had a bit of CSS saying div background image of fluffy cats dot ping. Actually, let's go kittens because they're just more fun, aren't they? And then if we were to later apply like happy dog, it's applying to the same element, but in WebKit both of these are going to be downloaded even though this is being overridden and this is what's going to be applied. That's what we want to see, but both are being downloaded, so that's going to slow down your load times. It's going to be extra load on the server, and it's just something that you really don't want. So when you're overlapping, be really careful about that. It's usually best, if you're going to be doing background images, to do them back to back to avoid downloading anything that you don't have to. There's no reason that you can't use both methods. If you have very similar styles, if you have different breakpoints and you want to overlap, but you have background images as well, then that's fine. You can overlap and then just do small queries, small back-to-back queries for your images. Another thing to consider is what you want the default to be. So I mentioned earlier that it's a good idea to have as much code as possible outside of media queries. But what should that style be outside? You know, should we work from the mobile style and then build up, or should we work from the desktop style and then sort of break it down, or maybe somewhere in between? Well, you'll often find that your mobile styles are more simple than your desktop styles, and so they're a better starting point, especially if you're going to be using the overlapping method. Also remember what I said about WebKit browsers here. If you were doing the overlapping and you did have the background images in there, and you're starting from the desktop and then breaking down, then mobile devices would have to download all the desktop assets as well as the mobile assets. And bear in mind that mobile devices are far more likely to be on a slower connection or even to have limited data. So controlling what their device downloads is really quite important to making sure they have a good experience on your website. So that's a strong argument for using the mobile style as your default. Another point is that unless you intervene, the default is what's going to be seen on the unsupported browsers, so Internet Explorer 8 and below. Statistically, most of your visitors will be on desktops, and it is, unfortunately, still important to support IE8 because it represents a good 20% of desktop traffic. There are a few options for Internet Explorer. You can use conditional comments, so I'll create another new file here. And the way this works is you just say, if it's less than IE9, don't need the O there, then, oh, what am I doing? Christ. Okay, so it's like a conditional comment, so it's just like an HTML comment. So you'd open it up like that and have this little if statement, if less than IE9, and then you'd create your link tag. I'm not in HTML mode, so I can't do that. Then you create your link tag in here, and you make that something like ie.css, and then close it just like that. And if close it something like that. No, you need to close your HTML comment, obviously. So then what you're doing there is serving a single static style sheet to Internet Explorer 8 and below. So that's one option, so that's not bad. There's also the option of respond.js. This is a pretty lightweight script made by Scott Jail, or Gel, not entirely sure how to pronounce that. But as it says here, it's a polyfill for the min, max, width CSS media queries. So it only supports the min and max width media queries, but that's really, as I said earlier, most of what you're going to be using media queries for. So this would do exactly what you want it to do in most cases. Note that unsupported browsers with JavaScript disabled will not work with this, but they're very much the minority, and to be honest they are just asking for trouble, so I wouldn't worry too much about them. So there you go, that's all the advice I have for you for using media queries for your responsive web designs.